Hey everybody, Grommel's here with a new video, and today I have the first DCS World video on my channel. As I have mentioned in the past, I want to take a look at some more flight sims to bring a bit more variety to the channel, and DCS was of course one of the titles on my list to look at. And I recently got around to taking a look at DCS. Now, I'm not completely new to it. I own the Lomac, the original Black Shark, as well as A10C. However, that was years ago, and back then I did not get into it much. Really did not do much beyond the basic tutorials. I also lacked head tracking back then, which might be a reason for that. As you probably know, DCS Digital Combat Simulator has a business model that you find often in flight simulators like this today. The base game DCS World is free to play, and if you have an interest in flight simulations and haven't tried it yet, I would suggest you do. It's pretty good. Now, the free base game comes with a Su-25T ground attack plane, an advanced version of the Su-25 I fly here, as well as a DF-51, an unarmed trainer version of the Mustang to fly. Other planes are sold as modules you can add to DCS World, and they are very detailed. Now, taking another look at DCS, I like it a lot, and I have a great time with it. I have to say, it is my favorite so far among the flight sims I took a look at for flight sims to feature on the channel. Even just trying the different planes and weapon loadouts and playing with the mission editor is a lot of fun. Reminds me a bit of the old days where I spent hours building missions for Operation Flashpoint in the editor and playing them from different perspectives. Maybe I can get some friends into playing it and play some self-built scenarios in co-op in DCS. Now, as I said, I already owned the A10C module, and as I decided to test DCS again, I also got Flaming Cliffs 3, which includes the planes I knew from Lomac, though those are older planes and not quite as detailed, and also got the MiG-21 BIS, which is amazing by the way, and tested those out a bit in the last few days. Additionally, since there is a sale going on, I also just got Combined Arms, which lets you command ground units, and I will take a look at what you can do there in a different video. And also in the sale I got Black Shark 2, so I got a helicopter too, and the Ka-50 with its fly-by-wire controls work well with my current setup. So I would say you will probably see more DCS videos on my channel in the future. Now, DCS is of course a bit more on the complex side, and there's much to learn, and I'm not one who likes to stumble on multiplayer servers unprepared. I like to gain some experience first and learn the game properly, but I also want to bring you some content from the game. Since I really enjoy it and I will most likely spend some time with it, I also want to make some videos. So I figured a good way to start doing that before we get into some multiplayer action later on is to make some videos showing off and explaining some of the weapons in DCS, talk a little on how they work and how they are employed, with some hopefully entertaining gameplay footage and examples for the weapons. Now, mind you, this is not meant to be a tutorial. I won't go through all the switchology and the like, only the basics needed to understand what is going on. There are enough tutorials out there, so I don't need to make another one. However, so far we had of course mostly World War II action as well as some spaceships on the channel, and those World War II fighters obviously are used in a very different way. So I thought it might be interesting to take a look at the modern weapons in DCS in comparison, and at the same time it helps to set the stage for future videos, with some of the functionality of the weapons already explained. That might not be obvious to viewers that don't have experience with simulators like DCS. Also, it will help me test out a format for DCS content. With its complexer system management and PVR combat, I think some explanations of what is going on is needed, as it would be otherwise hard to follow for viewers not used to modern air combat. So with that explained, let's get into talking about stuff that makes things you don't like disappear. And in this first video I want to take a look at air-to-air missiles, naturally, with other weapons like cannons and air-to-ground being covered in later videos. Air-to-ground will probably take multiple videos as there is a lot of it, especially with the A10C module. But for now, air-to-air missiles. Now, air-to-air missiles in DCS come in three main variations, that being infrared, semi-active, radar-guided and active radar-guided, which all have their own specialties and quirks to keep in mind. Now let's start with infrared homing missiles. Their concept is of course pretty straightforward. They have an infrared seeker in the nose, which can lock up heat signatures of the target and guide it to the target this way. Now, infrared missiles are usually smaller and shorter range, meant for close range combat or self-defense. There are however also longer range IR missiles like the R-27T you can use on the MiG-29 or Su-27 for example, but the most common ones like the Sidewinder or the R-60 like we currently have on this MiG-21 are smaller than their longer range radar guided versions and generally very straightforward and simple to use. Activate the missile, point it at the target, and when the missile sees the target you will get some visual or audio sign and you can fire it. It's fire and forget, so as soon as the missile is off the rail you don't have to worry about it anymore. It will either hit or miss, but you can't influence that anymore. Now the infrared seeker in the nose of the missile is a passive sensor, which means it is not sending anything out on its own. It just sees the infrared picture of a plane and flies at it. A radar in comparison of course is sending out radar signals, which are easy to detect. So a pilot often doesn't know when an infrared missile is fired at him unless he sees it. In recent years modern fighter planes generally have some capability to detect the infrared signature of the incoming missile's rocket motor and warn the pilot that way, but in DCS you generally have to see them to know that they are coming. Now one thing to consider when using or fighting against infrared homing missiles is if the missile has all aspect capability and to what degree. Now what does that mean? Well, originally infrared homing missiles like the Sidewinder were pure tail chasers. They needed to see the hot engines to lock on and follow a target. So you still had to get behind the target to fire with those older Sidewinders. More modern versions of the weapon and other IR missiles, however, have all aspect capability, meaning they can see and recognize the infrared signature of a plane from all sides, not just the hot exhaust, and can lock onto it. Meaning you don't have to see the hot engines, you can fire the missiles in a head-on or from the side. Most infrared missiles in DCS have some all-aspect capabilities, but the older ones somewhat limited. For example, with the R-60 on the MiG-21 you often have to see the rear quadrant of the enemy plane to fire. While with the more modern R-73 or Sidewinder you can fire head-on. Now the R-73 also has the capability to move its seeker head a bit and look to the side or up and down a few degrees, making it possible for the missile to lock onto a target without it being directly in front of the shooting plane, which is a big advantage in a dogfight. So that's some basic info. Let's take a look at a quick scenario in which I employ them. In this scenario I will fly the MiG-21 BIS armed with the R-60M IR missiles, which are pretty small and with a small warhead. This missile is only about half the weight of a Sidewinder, but the warhead is only about a third of what the Sidewinder got, so the missile often only damages a target. In this mission I carry 6 of them, and I'm trying to close in on a pair of F-14A Tomcats. Since those are fully armed with long-range Phoenix and medium-range Sparrow missiles, and have a powerful radar, I don't want to try any kind of long-range engagement. Instead I try to stay low and out of their line of sight, flying through this valley. Even with radar-guided missiles equipped, the effective range of the MiG-21 is very low, absolutely no comparison to the Tomcat. So I try to close in and get in a close-range dogfight, negating the Tomcat's PVR capabilities. The Tomcats are actively looking for me and they do lock me up and fire really fast when they get line of sight. Benefit of having a second guy in the plane, I guess. With less capable radars, just being close to the ground and below the attacker would be enough to hide in the ground clutter and not being picked up by the radar. Ground clutter means that the radar is overwhelmed by the radar returns from the ground it is pointing at and you can't pick out the target anymore. But versus the Tomcat's powerful pulse Doppler radar that won't work, as this kind of radar has a so-called look-down, shoot-down capability. Radar signals being reflected by moving objects, like my jet, are coming back at a slightly shifted frequency, the Doppler shift, compared to those reflected by static objects, which the radar can use to filter out the terrain and just see moving targets, as well as determine their speed. I have to break the line of sight completely, get a ridge for example between them and me as I approach, or they can see me and fire. Now I had just one of them pass over me to my left and the second one showing up in front of me. The 4 lights on the radar warning receiver to the right of the gun sight show me that I'm locked up, and I try to duck as slow as possible into the valley to try to break the lock or make the missile hit the ground instead of me. And indeed I could see the explosion of one in front as it hit the ground. I pull up and to the left, hoping the F-14 that was in front of me was close enough and fast enough that it will overshoot, and I can come around at it as well as the second one that overflew me earlier. As I look for the second F-14 though, all I can see is a smoke pillar building in the distance. Looks like I'm in luck and one of the F-14s actually crashed trying to go after me. So I have only one to worry about, and now I am in dogfight range. And the MiG-21, thanks to its lightweight, is actually pretty maneuverable for a jet-powered pencil. So I'm slowly gaining on the heavier Tomcat and can eventually get behind the F-14 as it pulls up, aim the Pipper at its tailpipe, and I get the tone from the R60 indicating it has a lock. Hold down the weapon release button until the missile comes off the rail and it streaks up and hits the Tomcat. The F-14 is damaged and one engine is on fire, but with the R60's warhead being pretty tiny, the plane is still flying. However, not maneuvering anymore, so I can drop in behind the F-14 and fire a second one, getting another hit, and this time the crew ejects. I have another quick look around after that to make sure the second one really crashed, but it did and I can head back home. So, this was a little example with infrared missiles. Let's talk about radar-guided missiles. Now, radar-guided missiles come in two main variants: semi-active radar homing and active radar homing. Let's talk about the semi-active variety first, like the AIM-7 Sparrow, the predecessor to the AMRAAM, or the Russian R-27, or a variety of other often a bit older radar-guided missiles. Now, the seeker of a semi-active radar missile is actually a passive sensor, like the one on an IR missile. It is a radar receiver which can receive and interpret radar signals, but again is not sending anything out on its own. In order to track a target, such a missile needs the plane it is shot from to illuminate the target with its own radar. The way this works is, if you have a radar contact and you want to fire a semi-active missile at it, you have to lock the target, which will put the radar in single target track mode. The radar antenna will now, instead of moving back and forth searching the sky in front of you, point the radar antenna straight at the target and focus all its energy on illuminating this single target. Now, what the missile does is, it can home in on the return signal, which are reflected from the target, so the missile itself is passive, it is not sending any signals, just like an IR missile would not. However, since the target needs to be painted by the powerful aircraft radar for this to work, the RWR of the target will warn the pilot immediately if he is getting painted in this way, and he can take action. Now, other than that, there are a few other obvious disadvantages to this system. First of all, if your radar is just focusing on one target, it is not scanning anymore, which means you lose all sight on all other contacts you might have had on the radar, which is why ground-based systems usually have separate search and fire control radars to be able to do both at once. But in a fighter there isn't enough space for that. And secondly, since you have to illuminate the target, you have to keep the nose pointed somewhat in the direction of the target, and you can't take too many evasive maneuvers without losing the lock on the target. How much you can still maneuver depends on how much degrees your radar can look to the side or up and down. So if you fire on an enemy but he fires first and his missile is closer, you might be forced to take evasive action and lose lock, so your missile won't track anymore, while your enemy still does. Now, the second group of radar-guided missiles are the active radar-guided missiles. As the name suggests, those have their own small radar in the nose, so they are active themselves, meaning emitting signals. For the longest time, this kind of guidance was only used on very large, long-range missiles like the AIM-54 Phoenix, since you could not build radars small enough for smaller missiles. Since the 90s though, much smaller medium-range missiles like the AIM-120 AMRAAM or the R-77 are entering service. The advantage of this, of course, is, first of all, the missiles do not need the launching plane to illuminate the target, so it can stay in the scan mode, keep situational awareness up, and also don't inform the target that a missile has been fired at him, as the radar does not illuminate him. He gets a warning for a search radar, not a lock, at least not right away. And such a missile is, with some limitations, fire and forget. Now, the limitations are that the radar in such a missile is of course pretty small and with a much shorter range than the aircraft's radar, so unless you fire them from pretty close distances, the missile won't be able to see the target. However, the missile will at launch get an intercept vector for the intended target from the aircraft's radar and fly on an intercept course until close enough for its own radar to turn on and take over the tracking. If the target aircraft takes evasive action and the launch aircraft still has it on radar, it can update the missile in the air, giving a new intercept point. So that's the basic function of radar-guided air-to-air missiles. Let's take a look at some gameplay examples. So here's a quick one for the active radar-guided AIM-120 on the F-15C. We have 8 of those missiles and fly towards a few enemy planes. Now, unlike in the MiG-21, we are not hiding in a valley, because a F-15 with AIM-120s in this kind of PVR scenario is pretty much the king of the hill. The round display to the right is the radar warning receiver. Some new players mix it up with a radar display, but the radar is to the left. The radar warning receiver is warning us of a search radar to our front. It can also tell us what type of radar it is that is searching. The 29 suggests the kind of radar you find on either the MiG-29 or the Su-27, so the planes in front of us are either MiG-29 or Su-27. So since they were nice enough to announce their presence, we say hello as well and turn our radar on, which will lead to a similar reaction on their RWR. You will notice though that I don't have any contacts on the radar yet. This is because we are still out of range. The radar beam can be detected further than it can detect planes, meaning we can detect the enemy plane's radar beams before we can see them on our own radar, and vice versa. There are some tricks to increase detection range, but since this is not a radar tutorial, I keep it simple. After getting a bit closer, I finally get 2 contacts on the radar. Now I switch it to the track-wise scan mode, which gives me a bit of extra info on the enemy plane, and in this mode I can select them as targets for my AIM-120 missiles. When I do so, you will notice that I can still track the other contact, unlike with the AIM-7 semi-active missile, where you only get your target and nothing else. I can also select more than one target, and this way attack multiple targets at once. In this case I have the first enemy plane, a Su-27, the radar tells me, as primary target, and the other one as secondary. I can also see 2 more contacts a bit further behind, but according to the RWR they are no long-range threat, Su-17s, so I focus on the 2 flankers. I am in maximum fire range by now, the maximum range in which you can expect a hit when the target flies nice and straight and does not maneuver. However, it can be expected that those flankers will, so I hold my fire a little bit longer. The burn time of air-to-air missile rocket motors is, unlike what the movies show, pretty short, seconds. After that, the missile is losing speed and energy fast, and its ability to hit a maneuvering target is greatly reduced, so I waited till I got the lock warning and then fired and took some slight evasive maneuvers. The Su-27s have semi-active missiles, and when my missile forces them to maneuver heavily, they will lose lock, and their missiles can't track. Mine, on the other hand, don't necessarily need the lock anymore. My first 2 missiles forced them to maneuver and broke their lock, but they missed, and I fire a second one, again one at the primary and one at the secondary target. The primary target, after having evaded the first missile, came back around and is firing another missile of its own. I can see the smoke trail and start to go evasive, but my missile hits, taking the Su-27 out, and without the aircraft radar the semi-active missile is no threat. And I can work on taking the Su-17 fighter bombers out. I first thought I got both flankers, as I don't have them on radar or RWR anymore, but as I start to engage the Su-17s I can reacquire the second flanker. It is still around and heading away. If I would have fired semi-active missiles at the Su-17s, I would not have noticed this, as the radar would be in single target track mode and only showing the target and nothing else. This way though I can hunt down the second flanker afterwards. So those were the modern AIM-20 active radar-guided missiles. How about we take a look at some not so modern semi-active examples from the MiG-21 for comparison. So here I am back in the MiG-21 and I am in the valley again. This time I'm hunting for 2 F-4E Phantoms. Much less capable than the F-14s, but they still have a big edge over the MiG-21 in PVR capabilities, so you again don't want to play radar target for them at long range. And as I keep making DCS videos, I will come up with many more excuses to fly low levels through valleys and canyons, cause it is fun. Anyway, this time the enemy planes are not looking for me, and if I time it right I should appear in their sights as I come out of this valley. As armament I have R-60s again in the inner pylons, but on the outer pylons I have K-13 semi-active radar homing missiles. They are pretty small, about the size of a Sidewinder, and also look like one, but have a radar seeker instead of IR. So they will home in on targets which I illuminate with the MiG-21's radar. Speaking of, the MiG-21's radar is, as you will see, not quite as high-tech as the one on the F-15. And it does not have look-down, shoot-down capabilities, which means you will have trouble spotting things against the ground because of ground clutter. The MiG's radar also needs to be cooled to work, and the coolant won't last forever, so you can only use the radar for a limited amount of time. It also has a very short detection range. The MiG-21 was meant to be guided by a ground controller, so the radar is not really meant to search the sky for targets. The controller is supposed to tell the MiG where the targets are, but more as a means for some all-weather and night attack capabilities and to guide semi-active radar missiles. Well, by now I'm out of the canyon, and as soon as I came out my radar warning receiver showed a search radar, however not a lock. And I point my nose in that direction, I can eventually spot the phantoms. I turn my own radar on and get ready to attack. Now you can see two contacts pop up on the radar. I move my target selector over the one in the rear and lock him up. The radar goes into single target track mode, giving me more information about the locked target, but I don't see the other one on the radar anymore. Now with the radar's short range I'm pretty quickly in fire range as well, despite the missile's own short range, and I fire them. I fire both radar missiles, as those old missiles are not very reliable, and keeping the nose on target. The radar has a very limited cone, so you can't maneuver a lot without losing lock. However, with the phantoms apparently surprised and slow, the missiles hit and take the first phantom out. Now I'm out of radar missiles, so I put the pylon selector to pylon 1 and 2 where I have the R60s and go to IR missile mode. And in case you wonder, you can do this with hotkeys, I just did not have them set up yet. Now I'm in turn fight with the second phantom and in my lighter MiG slowly getting the upper hand. Now the MiG-21 might be old and not look like it would turn all that well, but again with its very light weight it can actually do better than some might expect, especially compared to the F-104 Starfighter for example, to which it often gets compared because of the somewhat similar pencil-like appearance. We go around one more time, and then as the F4 pulls up and loses some speed, I can get my nose up and slowly point it at the phantom. I point my Pipper and the R60's IR seeker straight at the phantom, and then nothing. The missile isn't locking on. The problem is the R60's limited all-aspect capabilities. I have to see more of the hot rear to get a lock. I would have gotten a snapshot with the cannon, but as I was getting my plane ready for combat I forgot to load the cannon, so it isn't ready to fire. The MiG-21's 23mm cannon uses charges similar like old Kaufman engine starters to work the action and get the round loaded into the chamber. You can load the gun this way and reload it if it jams. You have 3 such cartridges and I forgot to press the button for one of them. I got 2 quick locks on the Phantom and fired 2 missiles, but at this range the missiles aren't maneuverable enough to get a hit. So as I follow the Phantom back down, I hit one of the cannon load buttons to get the round into the chamber and the gun ready to fire. The gyro gun sight is off, but at this range I don't need it. The Phantom is pulling hard and launching flares, and the next missile just misses, so I start to engage with my cannon. I fire a few bursts, and as I get closer I eventually get a hit on the Phantom, which seems to damage its right engine. The Phantom is still flying, but not maneuvering anymore, so it is just a matter of getting behind him and firing another R60 missile to finish the job. So those were some more weapons on the MiG-21, and some basics on air-to-air missiles in DCS. I hope this was enjoyable, and I think I will have more DCS videos on the channel soon. And then also taking a look at some air-to-ground weapons. Since this is the first DCS video on my channel, I would also like to request some feedback, as this is also a bit of a hopefully successful test run on how I more or less plan to present DCS content, similar as I do with my other videos, explaining what is going on in hopefully such a fashion that you don't need to play the game yourself and still see what is happening, which can be a bit of a challenge in a game like DCS, but I also don't want to go into too much detail in these videos. Again, they are not meant to be tutorials. And well then, this is it for this video. I hope it was entertaining, thanks for watching, and maybe I'll see you next time.